Hello, so this session is about qualitative data analysis, and the first thing that I have there is a quote from one of the scholars on this topic, and one of the things that I've highlighted in red from that is that it is rigorous and scholarly. Okay, so the aim is to transform and interpret qualitative data in a rigorous and scholarly manner. But as you can see from that quote, there's actually no consensus on how to do it. And this is one of the problems. So it is, I would say it's a formal process, but it shouldn't be ad hoc, but there are all sorts of different ways of trying to do qualitative data analysis. And what I would suggest for dissertation purposes is you choose a particular method of data analysis that you understand and demonstrate that you've meticulously followed this approach. Okay, and keep it quite simple. So there are lots of different types of analysis. So if you look at the textbooks on qualitative data analysis, you'll see all of these things mentioned and plenty of others, and also some quite unique ones that people have developed. I don't know much about many of these. I don't know anything about hermeneutic analysis. I've done a little bit of discourse analysis. I've used thematic analysis lots of times, and have some experience of narrative analysis. But little of the other ones. So don't get too bogged down in this. And generally for dissertations, I would suggest that most of you will use thematic analysis, but talk about it carefully with your supervisor if you're planning to use something else. Some of these approaches are quite complicated and quite time-consuming. Discourse analysis in particular, because you need to transcribe data in a particular way. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is begin analysis during your data collection. So you can do all the data analysis at the end, but generally in qualitative research, it's an iterative process. You build on what you're finding out as you go along. So, I do a fair bit of interview-based research, and what I like to do is do 2 or 3 interviews and then reflect on what I'm finding, because then I can actually, ask slightly different questions in later interviews, because you're allowed to do that with qualitative research, because maybe something's coming out from that initial data that I want to explore more. So, it's quite important that, you try to do that. The other thing I'd say is also it reduces time later on when you suddenly go, oh my God, I've got a big pile of qualitative data. How am I going to deal with this? If you started dealing with it, it's much easier. So I'm going to talk through basically 5 steps here of doing qualitative data analysis. There are, some books will talk about it in a slightly different way, but I think this is probably one of the most straightforward ways to think about it. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn. So first of all, data management. So you're going to have some data. It might be a whole load of data from interviews, it could be some observation notes, it might be videos, it might be photos, it might be social media posts. But first of all, if you've got interviews, you need to transcribe these. So you need to get something written out so you can repeatedly look at it. You cannot analyse data from listening to recordings. So you need to transcribe and organise it. Okay, and that goes for, videos, all sorts of things like that. We need to get something that we can kind of carefully look at and not have to keep finding materials by going back and forth through a recording. And then the next stage is, having transcribed a load of data, I'm going to have a big pile of it and need to try to make sense of this. So typically I will read through things, and this is why I like to analyse my interviews as I go along, because it's horrible when you've got a pile of about 5 interviews to read through. When you've got 2 or 3 at a time, it's quite interesting. And then I will add notes to that, which is referred to as memos. And this is to sort of try to identify key concepts or interesting things that are happening in your data. So memo writing is, as it says there, basically your ideas about the data. So this might help inform subsequent interviews. It could be your reflections and, okay, that links to the literature. I remember reading about that. It could be that you think, I don't really know what they mean here. Perhaps you need to go back to an interviewee and talk to them about something more. You could see that there are particular patterns, and you might also see contradictions. Oh, someone said this, but actually the next person interviewed said complete opposite. So, basically it's your thoughts on the contents. So I've got an example here. So this is this is some data. Just have a read through this quote. This is some data from an interview. We did these interviews with people who had taken part in multicultural lunches that were organised in the Dorset area by the Dorset Race Equality Council. So just have a little read of that. So this is a participant talking about, other people who attend these multicultural lunches. And hopefully if you've read that through now, one of the things, you'll see the memo that I wrote on this. So one of the things I identified was the value of the event to migrant women, because what it did was provided a safe space for them to come and be. They could start using English. And they could build some confidence and independence, and that's all I wrote about that. So it was just my ideas on that data. But, there's some concepts in there. There's things like safe space, there's building confidence, independence, so we're beginning to build some ideas about the data. And then the next stage will be describing, classifying, interpreting data codes and themes. So this is kind of building your codes for the data, which comes out of those memos. So looking back on that memo there, there might be a code related to safe space, there might be a code related to language use, confidence, independence, all of those things could become a code. Now, I'm not going to go through that here because that needs a bit more time, so I'm doing that in a separate recording. And then there's interpreting the data. So once you've got some codes and you've developed themes from the data, things you might do is you might link those themes to the existing literature. You'll probably explain and develop ideas. You'll explore similar and different interpretations. So if people are talking about things in different ways, is there any reason for that? Is there something else in that interview that can tell you why a person is talking about something quite differently? Are certain types of people talking about things in different ways? So the strategies will vary depending on the type of analysis you're using. So if you're using discourse analysis, and I don't particularly recommend this in a dissertation, you might focus on the way that people talk about things in particular, so the kinds of words they're using, the pauses in their language use. So, there are differences depending on the approach. And then representing the data. Again, I'm going to cover that in a separate presentation. So we've got something on, writing up and presenting qualitative data. Okay, so that just gives you a little insight into the qualitative data analysis process. And you now need to go and watch some of the other slides that are on qualitative data analysis.